So ever since Texas Instruments released their new 4K DLP chip, we've been seeing 4K projectors pop up all over the place. So today we're going to be checking out the lowest price 4K projector so far, which is the ViewSonic PX747 4K. So without going into too much detail, this new DLP chip that we've seen in all these new 4K projectors uses pixel shifting to produce 8.3 million pixels on the screen. This means that they produce an image that's sharp enough to meet 4K standards, so they're considered true 4K projectors. So ViewSonic, who's obviously no stranger to making projectors, has released two new 4K projectors known as the PX727 4K and the PX747 4K, and both of them are priced under $1,300. And what's really crazy is that just a couple weeks ago, the PX747 went on sale for less than $1,000, which is insane. So both the 727 and the 747 look pretty much identical, but the difference between these two projectors is that they have different color wheels, which allows one of them to be brighter than the other. So considering their price pretty much the same, you might be wondering why you would want to pay the same amount for a projector that's not as bright. Well, there are some trade-offs that we'll talk about a little bit later. So the one we're going to be checking out today is the brighter version, which is going to be the PX747. So in the box, you get a backlit remote with a nice cool blue backlight, batteries for the remote, a VGA cable, and a power cord. Now, once I got this projector out of the box, I immediately thought that this thing was really small compared to the other 4K projectors, and it has a nice and sleek design. On the front, it's got a nice gold ring around the lens along with that iconic ViewSonic logo, as well as the front IR sensor. The top of it has a keypad with all your menu buttons, a black power button, and another IR sensor. Over the lens, you'll find your zoom dial and focus rings, and the bottom has two adjustable feet to help you tilt it, even though one of the feet isn't actually adjustable. So on the back, you have a few ports including audio input and output jacks, two HDMI ports with the left one being the one that you'll use for 4K, a mini USB service port, RS-232 port, a full-size USB port, and a 12-volt trigger. So the specs on this projector are very similar to some of the other recent 4K projectors that we've seen, but the one thing that stands out more than anything else is that this thing can produce 3,500 lumens, which will make it one of the brightest 4K projectors so far. Okay, so the image quality from this projector looks pretty good. It's super sharp and it's definitely one of the brightest 4K projectors I've seen. I had no problems getting the focus perfect and it appears to be spread evenly across the screen, and I was able to get about a 130-inch screen from around 14 feet away. It has 3 different modes including bright, standard, and movie mode, and what I found most interesting about this projector is that bright mode doesn't look really green like it does on most projectors. Now, it's not something that I'd use personally since the colors are really dark, but if you're in a really bright room, this might be helpful. Now, in my opinion, the best mode is going to be movie mode by far since it's pretty bright and still has accurate colors. Now, the colors are a little oversaturated, but it's a really nice, sharp, and bright image. So gaming on this projector works really well, especially if you like bright games with a lot of whites. It has an input lag of around 50 milliseconds, which is good enough for the average gamer, but if you're a hardcore gamer, this might not be fast enough for you. So both the PX747 and the 727 offer support for HDR signals, and I'd say that the HDR performance is okay. It's about on par from what I've seen with other budget 4K projectors. So HDR on this projector does have a tendency to look a little bit washed out. It also makes whites look pretty dull, which sort of defeats the purpose of buying a 3,500 lumen projector. So as I said earlier, these two ViewSonic projectors have two different color wheels. The PX747, which is the one I have with me today, has an RGB-W color wheel, and the 727 has an RGB-RGB color wheel. This means that the 747 can produce really bright whites, but certain colors will actually be brighter on the 727. So depending on what you're watching, the 727 might actually look a little bit brighter overall. Now, to be fair, this projector isn't really meant to be used in a dark room with crazy color accuracy. It's meant to be used in a brighter room where the 727 wouldn't work too well. So even though this projector has a good quality image overall, there were 3 issues that stood out to me. The first issue is that the fans on this thing get pretty loud. Now, I'm actually pretty forgiving about fan noise, especially on really bright projectors, but I do have to say that the buzz from these fans was a little distracting. It does have a pretty good 10-watt internal speaker that helps drown out the fans if you plan on sitting it on a coffee table, but it's still something to consider. Now, it does have a silence mode that you can activate in the menu that makes it pretty much quiet, but that basically turns off XPR or pixel shifting, which essentially turns off 4K, so you end up with a 1080p projector. Now, of course, most people aren't going to want that, but it is nice that they give you the option if the fan noise is too bothersome. So the second concern I have is the projector's vertical offset. This means that if you're projecting on a 120-inch screen, the projector projector has to be mounted 6 inches above the screen if it's ceiling mounted, or 6 inches below the screen if it's sitting on a table, which is pretty significant. Now this can be fixed by adjusting the keystone, but I don't recommend adjusting keystone, especially with projectors that use pixel shifting. The third issue I have is the light border or halo, which has been noted on all the other 4K projectors that use this same DLP chip. It's more noticeable when you have a smaller screen, and it does seem to bother some people, but depending on how picky you are, you might not even notice it. But other than those few things, I still think this is a great projector for the money, and considering it's gone on sale for less than $1,000, I think it's a steal for a 4K projector. And for all of you guys who think $1,000 isn't a budget projector, you have to admit that the prices and options are definitely getting better. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you did, go ahead and mash that like button for me. Leave your questions and comments about this projector in the comment section. I'll respond to your questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So on the back, you have, but the one thing that stands out more than anything else is that this thing can produce 35. On the front, it's got a nice gold ring around the lens with that Vuconic, oh my God. On the front, it's not, whatever.